On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Asish Soudhamma. He is the Vice President of Cloud, Security, and Developer Experience at PIMCO. We're going to be talking about a strong relationship between developer experience, cloud adoption, security. Asish has a very interesting role in the fact that he covers three different areas. So he has a very good purview, engineering background. We're going to be talking about understanding customers, in this case being engineers, having the feedback loop to stakeholders to identify that customer stakeholders, state, improving their circumstances, making their lives easier. So a lot of this will be centered around developer experience in that context, and I'm excited to cover it. Asish, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be part of this, and I hope I will share some of my learnings that will be beneficial for others.
Absolutely. Let's start off with two things. Make sure everyone knows who PIMCO is, and then obviously your title is Vice President. You're in charge of the cloud area, the security area, developer experience. Also tell everyone what some of your responsibilities are, because that seems like a lot of hats.
Sure. It's a good question. So let's start with PIMCO. PIMCO is one of the world's premier fixed income investment managers. We started the company 50 years ago in Newport Beach, California. The unique value that PIMCO introduced to the investors were the innovative total return approach to fixed income investment. And as of today, the company manages around $1.7 trillion of assets. And then we do have offices across the globe. When it comes to my title, that's an interesting question too. So my official title at the company is a vice president within the platform engineering. I lead the solution architecture team, which focus internally to the solution architecture at PIMCO, developer experience, and I'm very deeply integrated with cybersecurity, especially the application security area. And the reason for that, I think a lot of those things going to be we're discussing in the podcast. But the reason for that, if you look into these areas, platform engineering, solution architecture, cybersecurity, they all have a very deep internal connection. The connection in the sense, I view platform engineering as the output from the requirements that come both from developer experience and application security or security altogether. So we are in a very, very unique situation within the company where we want to view it as a single unit so that we can produce the best outcome to our customers, in this case, our developers.
Awesome. Yeah, and I appreciate the context because when I spoke to you, obviously some of that came through. And I guess let's go a little bit more granular, right? Just at a high level, you are responsible for different areas. There is a strong overlap, right? That platform engineering, maybe we can talk about it towards the end, is a very unique title. It's defined different things at different places. But are you responsible for three distinct teams, meaning one that manages cloud, one that manages security, and one that is responsible for that platform component?
I'm responsible for the two of the team. And as I mentioned before, I work deeply with our cyber team on the cyber integration with the platform. And I also, a little bit of my background, security is not something new to me. Early in my career, I got a chance to work on security products. And my last job also, I worked on security analytics products related to application security. So it's one of the areas that's close to my heart. It's very easy for me to think through security. So,
absolutely, the overlap with cloud, and I guess when you're talking about platform engineering and that relationship with security, obviously you get the DevSecOps team where it even overlaps closer to those DevOps people. When you're looking at the land, the overview of your team and the relationship with security, and you're looking at developer experience, I guess a lot of times some companies have, their software companies have shared services, obviously. And I guess when you talk to people who are managing infrastructure shared services, there's always a question of the customer, right? Because it gets splintered out, different people are using it. In your case, your customers are the engineering teams?
Yes.
And I guess from that, when you're kind of looking at, developer experience in the context engineering, as a leader, what are your goals? What are you trying to hope to help with in terms of the engineering team?
So this may be a very different definition of developer experience, but to me, a developer experience means ability of a developer to focus on what matters most. And if I have to say a mathematical formula for developer experience is the total time planned for a task divided by the actual time taken to finish the task. So that's, to me, the valuable part of developer experience. Now, there's a lot of variable going to play into this, including the developer's ability, their skill level, and things like that. But I'm taking all those apart to simplify this. It's like the value produced by a developer within a given period of time. What it takes to build a great developer experience is you need to have minimal processes. Technically speaking, delete any unwanted process and workflows from developers' life to make sure that they only have to go through what matters most. And they need to have better tools. And they need to have a very optimized communication model so that the feedback loop with the developers are going to be like significantly easier, rather than you're going to have a lot of people or loops that you have to go through for the communication to reach to the final customers. So if you look at the priority of the things that I mentioned, like minimal processes, better tools, optimized communication model, you are now going to start seeing what I said before is the deep connection with the platform engineering and security.
Let me ask you a question about that, because I think I actually really appreciate your viewpoint. You said, technically speaking, delete unnecessary processes. And that's obviously going to make the life of the engineering team easier. In execution, like actually executing that, putting them in play, that puts obviously some of the onus on your team. Like, you got to make sure there's things, and I want you to define what those things are. There's got to be things that you guys have dialed in to make that easier. Because I'm assuming this could also be done in a way where, you could complicate, right? With the fact that we're talking about this means, there are teams out there in the world that, this relationship is complicated for the engineering team. In your case, your goal is to delete unnecessary processes, allow the developer to focus on what matters most. How much more, I guess, is on your team to make sure that is executed?
There's a lot. I think this is where the value comes from, mostly from platform perspective. So there is, again, from a platform perspective, one of the quote that I actually really liked about what a platform means is from one of the quote from Gartner's, which they say that a platform is a very small abstraction of tools by not taking away the key features or differentiating features of the tool. A lot of times what I've seen is the companies where I worked in other companies also is building a platform to produce an outcome that the platform teams feel is the best for the customers, and by hiding or abstracting away the underlying capabilities of the tools that they're using. This leads to a lot of frictions because your time to become productive using the custom tools that you built internally is significantly higher for engineering teams. It's a typical example. Let's say you hire an engineer who knows how Kubernetes works, and then you bring that engineer into the company, and all of a sudden you have a lot of abstraction to Kubernetes, and you have, like, the engineer had no idea how to build this. They have to relearn all the skills, and there is lack of documentation available, lack of support available. You have to go through all these things internally. So to me, that's the higher friction point. So you should not have that level of friction created with a tool and ask the developers to use it. And that's when I said that we want to use developer experience as a way to make sure that the requirements from a developer is well understood within the platform engineering, And while they build tools, they build that the abstraction which makes sense to make more productive output from the company perspective, at the same time not hiding the distinguishing features.
Absolutely. And I like that definition because I think, obviously the developers, different than platform engineers, your customers as the engineers who are using the various services, they are already busy with producing, various other pieces of component. The last thing we need is additional overhead. When you're looking at something like tools, and you mentioned Kubernetes, and your team's looking at tools, and you're thinking of, hey, this is something that could help us. This is a product that could help us. How much of your thought goes downstream of going, okay, well, this is good for us, but what happens to them? Because as your customers, obviously, the last thing you'd want to do is, or maybe in a case, the benefit's so great that your stakeholder is understanding of the impact. But what happens when you're looking at tools and evaluating them to make sure that it stays within your model here?
Two of the important stakeholders in our evaluation process of tools are, one, a developer team who is going to be a potential customer of this tool, and two is information security, just to make sure that we are not bringing in a tool which is not going to meet our security requirements. We have a mantra almost. It's like, if it is not a customer, don't build it. So if we don't identify a potential customer for a tool, then we're not going to prioritize the tool. It's that simple. And we work with the customer during the journey to make sure that the tool is going to meet their requirements. We bring in their feedback to see where we want to make optimizations that make sense for them, and where do we want to leave the freedom to the developers to tune things and make things more personalizable for their projects.
Interesting. I guess a question for you. I've asked this of security professionals. You have a unique view. You have a relationship with security, and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are, because obviously security, in of itself, there's a vast array of functions within security. I guess the part that overlaps with cloud becomes a little bit more specific, and becomes a little bit more defined. And the tools that they necessarily need to be considered. I guess when you're looking at your relationship with security, and obviously you're responsible for this developer experience, platform engineering, when you're collaborating with security to make sure that the tools are maybe common, or that there's an understanding, how does that relationship with security work?
It's relatively easy, the place that I'm in right now, because we do have the security teams who understand the need of cloud native security. So we are thinking more as security policy as code, tools that can be easily integrated with CI pipelines, tools which produce feedbacks faster. In fact, to an extent where when that team evaluate products, they view platform as a customer too, because they want most of their controls to be part of the platform versus to be like one of the tools that a developer have to be bringing as an afterthought. It's like, oh, I'm actually done all the things through my CI/CD pipeline. Now I have to do security. We want to have the mindset of, I've done everything through the CI pipeline, that including my testing, my security, my code coverages, my deployment, all of those things. It's just one unique pipeline gets me all the way from the start to end, rather than I have to context switch between different things. That is also one of the DX problem, because when you have to do the context switching, your learning curve is going to be higher. You're going to take more time to finish the task, and that's also a problem, because if it is not automated, you probably don't know when it's going to break. And then you have a larger cycle of fixes that you have to do in order to get back and then produce the value.
Absolutely. I guess I was listening, and you mentioned obviously your team, the security team. You guys are trying to understand the experience. Anytime I think experience, I start thinking, well, there needs to be some metrics, there needs to be some feedback. What's the process look like to actually, get that feedback from your customers to make sure that, you guys are hitting the mark or the process that goes into that?
It's an interesting question. And the reason I said it's very interesting because some of these things are very new to the customer. So they probably don't know how or what is the right feedback to share. As an example, let's say we're introducing a new security tool, which our developers weren't aware of before. That's a long-term process for us. We don't just throw in a tool just because we feel the tool is the most important things in there. What we focus on building a culture. That is the most important aspect. Tools are basically, your helpers while you're building the culture. So we very carefully planned any changes within the developers area, starting with the culture aspect of it, and make them ready to understand what is this tool is going to provide, what functional area it's going to cover, why is it important, and how this is going to change as a developer, the day-to-day job that you're doing. And then we talk about the tools that is going to help them, how to use the tool, and then we train them. And then we integrate it with our CI pipelines to ensure that there is least friction possible while using the tool. And that's when the developers are really ready to start giving us the feedback on, look, we looked into this tool, we have good understanding about the capabilities. Now I have this scenario. I want you to help me with this scenario. So that's the moment of maturity where we both are gonna say, okay, clearly this is an opportunity for us to start working and optimizing this thing. Let's take it as a ticket on our side to see what's the best that we can do. Now, this is an iterative process, right? So we're going to start with, as I mentioned before, we start with a POC with one customer. We don't start anything without a customer. So this is going to be an iterative process throughout the POC, all the way to the maturity of the product until we get to a stage where, like, okay, this is generally available to all the developers now because we have tested it, we validate our assumptions, we got the feedback, we implemented the feedback, now it's ready. So that initial set of customers that we are onboarding with this particular process is very critical because we need more deeper sessions and feedback loops with them. So that the later part, we still gotta get a lot of feedback from the later part because we're definitely not gonna cover everything in the first step. That's okay. But at least we make sure that, we're not gonna ship something and call it as GA without getting, our customers' feedback on it.
Interesting. I guess when you're going through that process, and I like you mentioned focus on building a culture, tools are the helper in building the culture. And once as this relation, you mentioned even tools going out live and sometimes the developers are still, assimilating to the developer experience function. When you actually are talking and capturing, the feedback from the customer, in this case, the engineers, I guess, are there people that, you want to make sure, because obviously you don't want to make sure anyone is left behind in terms of impacting them negatively. What do you do about the person that's a little bit more quiet, right? And they're like, they might grit their teeth and bear it and just not want to rock the boat, but you can maybe tell that their life isn't as comfortable given the fact that the tool has provide them complexity. Maybe it's not been as positive for them. Like, how do you identify, those maybe the silent or struggling developer that otherwise goes under the radar?
So a couple of different approaches that we do. One thing that we try to do with all of our new tools is a top-down approach. Like, we start with our senior management, CTO level, saying that this is the tool that we are going to introduce to solve this problem. And the reason that we pick the tool over the other is the distinguishing features. But we're not the the ultimate authority to say that this is going to work for everything. This is based on our analysis, what we talk to this selected set of people. Now, can you nominate some people within your areas, or can you talk to your teams to make sure that they understand this and they have a way to communicate back to us? So we give them the opportunity from the top-down management standpoint. Then we do have, like any other companies, we have internal groups. We call it as councils, meetups, etc. And then we start talking about the change that we are bringing in those meetups and council meetings. Make sure that the engineers and the developers listen to those things. So that's the way that we reach out to the mass to make sure that everybody is aware of this change. It's not GA yet, but we are giving an opportunity for everyone to come partner with us in the journey. Those are the two different ways that we do bring the change. And as I said, it typically takes us to navigate through the culture part of it longer, and that gives a sufficient amount of time for developers to have that feedback loop established with us.
Absolutely. I guess when you're kind of looking back and some of your roles, you have an interesting background, right? I mean, you've come into this position. You're able to see a wider view. Platform engineering is newer. I'd say it's a newer function within companies to even split off this developer customer experience component, because obviously it is a shared service. When you're actually looking to grow your teams and you're looking to expand, have you noticed that maybe the hiring for these type of roles have gotten more complicated because they have to, it almost seems like they have to almost be a little bit wider. Like they have to understand several sub-disciplines to be able to make those right decisions to help the engineering community?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the area that we focus on. We do want this to be not just we are hiring for developer experience or platform engineering. We do want this to be a criteria in general hiring, because there is fundamentals of engineering that you need, that everybody that you're hiring. Then you are going to look for people with an expertise in one area. What we look for is how much those people are trainable in a way that, once we bring those people into the company, can we make sure that, those developers can learn these things and quickly get on board with what we are doing. So that's the aspect that we look in, because as you rightly identified, it's very difficult for you to hire somebody who knows everything. Right? And if you go behind, only such profiles, then we are not leaving, others to grow up within the company, or, hire people who can potentially be a good candidate for a role. And we are just not giving the opportunity just because they didn't have the exposure in the past.
Awesome. Yeah, that's interesting. I actually spoke to someone who said they've gone to identifying attributes and training, because it is so difficult to, have one person that has the experience to broadly cover all this. So they're like, we're trying to find people, putting them through, a 4 to 6 month ramp up period to kind of understand these other components, because software engineering is the core, which I think is the complexity to what has come around. Is the world used to be tool driven, and a lot of this complexity was not there, and now everything is engineering driven. Everyone, security, you need to be an engineer. In data, you need to be an engineer. I mean, software engineers were always engineers, but all the other teams and departments have gotten this level of complexity where engineering is now just a baseline. That's very interesting to kind of see the growth of.
And with the introduction of cloud and cloud native tools, I think we're getting to a consensus that, okay, we all agree that we're all going to code this thing, right? Whether we want to call it as infrastructure as code, or your application business logic related code, or your security as a code, pipeline as a code. Everything is becoming as a code. And I think it's a very interesting way that we are breaking down the walls between, those were once existing between these teams. Because, look, I don't understand your language. That used to be one of the things before. Now it's like, I do understand what you're saying. And I have a way to tell you that what you're saying is most appropriate, or there's a better way to do it.
Absolutely. Definitely some interesting challenges. I mean, you got a unique seat. So thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing. I like the examples. I think they're some of them I'm going to have to remember as I talk to other leaders and see how their views are. But I like, you said focus on building a culture. Tools are helpers in building that culture. I'm going to remember that one. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me on this conversation. It's very interesting to share what we believe is the right thing, and also learn from others, and optimize these things.
Absolutely. So I'd like to ask everyone who comes on, if you could ask a future guest to cover a topic for you, what would you hope they would talk about on a future episode?
I have very philosophical level conversation on machine learning recently. And while I appreciate a lot of machine learning related use cases coming on how to optimize your photograph to 25 different ways, I want to know what are the best ways that we can leverage AI ML today in more humanitarian ways. So I'd like to get to hear from somebody who's actually investing their time and energy in AI ML area, and then helping the world to solve complex problems like maybe poverty, maybe cancer research and things like that.
Asish, if somebody wants to reach out to you to ping you on anything you've talked about on the podcast or anything at all, what is a good way of getting a hold of you?
LinkedIn. So my DMs are open in LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me. I do have a small presence in Twitter. Everywhere I am Asish RS, ASISHRS. So at the rate Asish RS is my short handle for everywhere.
Awesome, man. We'll make sure that's included. Again, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. If you can speak to Asish's topic, hit me up. Let me know. If you know someone that can, let me know. I'd love to have them on. I think topics like this are always great to have on. And secondly, if you like the episode, if you know someone that is going to benefit from it, share it. That's how we've grown. Throw a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcast, because that always helps us get the reach with the episodes and the podcast. Otherwise, that's it for now. Thank you and goodbye.